How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Chav Gimel, Daf 23 of Masechta Avodah Zarah. Friends, your friends. Okay, so yesterday we began the second parak of Masechta Avodah Zarah, and we asked the question. The question was that on the one hand, our Mishnah says, "Ein ma'amidim behema b'pundiko shel evdei kochavim b'nei shechshudin al arviyah," that we do not leave our animals in the kretschmers and in the care of Ovdei Kechavim because we're concerned that they might marry the animal. Now, however, at the same time, our Gemara had quoted a Braise that says that you can purchase an animal from Ovdei Kechavim to be used as a korban. What happened to being choshesh l'reviyah? What if they married the animal first? So be'etzim we had to kind of give a few different answers, but be'etzim what it came down to is if the kochavim chosin al mamonim was that the over kochavim chos al behemto shelo teoker. Then the thing is, if he marries the animal, then the animal will be unable to have babies, and the overcome doesn't want this, therefore he wouldn't do that to his animal. And therefore you can assume that the overcome didn't marry his own animal, and therefore you can purchase it to be used as a korban. Masha ein came, which is not the case. If you're just leaving your animal with a random overkochavim, in that case they might be more likely to marry the animal. Now, that was one answer, right? That be'etzim ovdei kochavim chas al be'emto shelo teoker. Today, we're going to have two more answers to this question. We're going to see the answer of Ravina and the answer of somebody else. Rav Pidos. Here we go. Ravina and Rav Pidos. Okay, mamish all the way at the top of Daf Chav Gimel, Amid Aleph, Ravina, Omar, says Ravina. Lekasha, there's no question here, right? Meaning our Mishnah says, don't leave the animal with the Oved Kochavim. The Brisa says, no problem buying an animal from an Oved Kochavim to use as a korban. What's the dealio? It says, Ravina Omar lekasha lechatchila di'evid. Oh, so it says Ravina, it's a shaila of lechatchila or b'di'evid. It's a shaila of lechatchila or b'di'evid. Our Mishnah is telling you the lechatchila. Our Mishnah is saying that ideally, do not leave your animal with an Oved Kochavim, because, it can end up a marriage situation. But what if you did? Okay, Beseder, it's fine. As we see that at the end of the day, you could purchase an animal from an Oved Kochavim to be used as a korban. So b'di'evid, you can rely that there was no marriage. But the Chatchila just, avoid it. So that's Ravina's take on it, that it's a lechatchila b'di'evid play. That when the Mishnah says don't do it, and the Brisa says it's okay, it means lechatchila don't do it, b'di'evid it's okay. Again, Ravina Amar says Ravina, like kasha, it's no problem lechatchila ha di'evid. That our Mishnah is lechatchila, the Brisa about buying an animal for a korban is bidi evid. Umina tema deshani bein lechatchila. Dishani bein lechatchila bein l'di'evid. Now, how do we know that this is like a thing? It says the Gemara. Ravina says that lechatchila b'di'evid. How do we know that there's like a lechatchila, like a lechatchila b'di'evid thing is a thing that you can make such a distinction? That it's a valid answer to say, oh yeah, that's just a lechatchila, that's b'di'evid. Because I'll give you another example where we make such a distinction. Now, this example that the Gemara is going to bring, you might, as we read it, you might be thinking to yourself, hey, wait, this isn't such a great example. This is specific, this is unique to, you can't compare apples and oranges a little bit. Okay, the Gemara is going to get there as well. So I guess what I'm saying is, like, just as we learn it, there's going to be some kind of aspects of the proof that you might be thinking like, wait, there's like something funny going on here. But nonetheless, Here we go. I just want to give you that heads up. All right, now, so how do we know, again, second line of Chav Gimel Aleph, Min Atemra, Dishani, Ben Chatchila, Ben Le Di Eved. How do we know that such a distinction is distinctionable? To say that, that's just Lechatchila and that's B'di Eved. Well, the Tanan that we learn in the Mishnah, well, because the Tanan, also in our Mishnah, it said, Lo Tesachir Imoim Mipnei Shechshudin Ala Arayis. Because also in our Mishnah was, do not, right, that a woman should not be alone with an Ovid Kochavim, because they're Chshudin Ala Arayis, because we're concerned that if they're alone together, the Ovid Kochavim might make a move. And yet, we have a Mishnah in Ksubis, V'raminu, Ha'isha shenechbisha bidei Ovidei Kochavim, Aydei Mama Mutaris L'Baila. That a Mishnah in Ksubis, and Afchavav says, that a woman who has been imprisoned, right, a married Jewish woman who has been imprisoned by the Oivdei Koichavim, so Ayidei Mamin, so if it's for money, then Mutaris L'Baila. So it's Taka, a Machloikes Rashi and Toisvis, about who is this woman? Who is this talking about an Eishes Yisrael, an Eishes Kohen? Rashi says you could say it's talking about an Eishes Kohen, meaning, so what's the shaila here? The shaila is that this Jewish woman who's married was essentially kidnapped, was kidnapped. Now she's returning to her husband. The question is she permitted to still be with her husband? Why wouldn't she be permitted? Why would she be prohibited from being with her husband? Well, here's the difference. If she's a Eishes Yisrael, if she's married to a Yisrael, so then, because of course the concern is, did she have bia with the Ovid Kochavim? Okay. Now, if she's in Eishes Yisrael, if it's be'ones, so then that would be okay. So then the concern might be that, well, maybe they had bia, but it was berotzen. Maybe she was okay with it, even if not initially. Then at some point she was okay with it. That's a concern, because if it was berotzen, then she would be forbidden to her husband. If she's in Eishes Kohen, so even be'ones she would be forbidden to her husband. So the question is that be'etzem, this woman was kidnapped by Ovdei Kochavim. She's being returned to her husband. The question is, she's still muteris to her husband. Whether she's an Eishes, whether she's an Eishes Kohen, essentially it's going to revolve around, again, there's going to be details, but honest, brasa, but let's not get into that, but revolve around the concept of, was there bia? Okay, do we assume that this woman who was kidnapped by the Ovdei Kochavim, that while she was in captivity, there was bia there. So what are we saying? Essentially, we're saying, well, she's muteris lebaila. She's muteris to her husband, i.e., that's not a concern. Okay, we're going to read it back inside in a second, but we're saying, okay, she's muteris lebaila. So you could say what that means is that, okay, so there's no concern of bia. So on the one hand, our Mishnah had said, that a Jewish woman should not have yichud with an Ovid Kochavim because that we're concerned that the Ovid Kochavim might make a move. Yet we're also saying that at the end of the day, if a woman was kidnapped by an Ovid Kochavim, she's still mutaris the baila when she comes home. Doesn't that imply that at the end of the day, we don't assume that there was actual bia there? Because if there was, then she would be a surah l'baila. So now let's read this back inside again. But it's not, so on the one hand, I'm going to read this Nachamo. Chav Gimel Amud Aleph, 2 lines from the top, second line of the daf. Mina Temra D'Shayni Bein L'Chatchila Bein L'Diavad. So how do you know, right? How can I prove to you that there's in fact a distinction between L'Chatchila and B'Diavad? Well, because it's not in our Mishnah. We said, Lo Tisachid Yishay Moim B'nei Shechshudin Ala Arayis. On the one hand, our Mishnah had said that a Jewish woman should not be alone with an Ovid Kochavim because they're Cheshudin Ala Arayis, concerned that there might be bia there. But at the same time, V'raminu, we have a contradiction. That a woman who was kidnapped by a Jewish woman, a Jewish married woman who was kidnapped by the Ovdei Kochavim, and this is going to be the kicker, right? This is the big distinction here. Meaning, if it's specifically for money, mutaris l'baila. Okay, that if the reason for the Ovid Kochavim kidnapping her was because she owed money, And therefore the Ovid Kocham says, okay, well, if she owes me money and she's not paying me back, I'm going to kidnap her. And then her husband is going to pay me the money to get her back. And that way I'll get my money. So now there's a specific reason why he kidnapped her, right? Didn't kidnap her because he wanted to kidnap her. He didn't kidnap her because he wants to kill her, right? He kidnapped her in order to get his money back. And therefore, he wants to, basically he's focused on getting his money back. He doesn't want to do anything to her. If he has bia with her, so then, maybe the husband's not going to want to pay him back. So he just wants to get his money back. And therefore, we can assume that there was no bia because, he is not focused on that. He's focused on basically gaining leverage to get what he wants, which is to get paid back. But let's not focus for a second on all those details about the fact that he wants to get paid back, even though it says but the proof is not. The proof is coming from the fact that, and again, we're going to throw this up because it's specifically a moment. But the proof is coming from the fact that we're saying that she's mutaris lebaila. That even after this ordeal, even after she was kidnapped and alone with her captor, who was Novik Kochavim, she's still mutaris lebaila, because we're assuming that even though we say that a woman should not be misyachi with Novik Kochavim, push comes to shove. At the end of the day, we're saying that she is mutaris lebaila, so be the eved, it would be okay. Now, ayidei nefashis asur lebaila. Now, if the Ovid Kochavim kidnapped her not because he was owed money, but because he wants to kill a Jewish woman, well, then he doesn't give 2 cents about her, and he's going to do whatever he wants to her, including ones. And in that case, she would be asur lebaila, right? Let's just say we say like Tosfos, we're talking about Eishes Kohen, even ba'ones, she would be asur. So in that case, then we assume that there would be bia. But in the Reisha, though, we assume that there wasn't bia, even though they were alone together. But so we want to say, and again, it's clear that there's going to be a rejection, and there's about to be a rejection. But what we want to say is, we see, well, in the Reisha, we said that she was permitted to return to her husband, which means that even though she was alone with the Ovid Kochavim, there was no bia. So we see b'di'evet at the end of the day, we don't necessarily assume that there was bia. But one second, why is that a valid proof? Maybe I'll say to you, afilu di'evet nami lo. No, really, I'll say to you that no, there's no lichatchila b'di'evet here. Our Mishnah says, Lo tisachiri moin, our Mishnah says that a woman should not be alone with an Ovid Kochavim because they're chshudin al arayis. And I'll say that if an Ovid Kochavim kidnaps a woman, a Jewish woman, of course she's asura lebaila. Of course we assume that there was bia. But but the Mishnah in Ksubis was very specific as to why she's permitted to her husband. And the reason is because he kidnapped her because he wanted to get paid back, and he's focused on getting his money back. He doesn't want to do anything that can hinder that. And therefore he's not going to have bia with her. So the Mishnah was specific as to why she's muteris lebaila. But if it wasn't al iskei mammon, by default, I would say even b'di'evet she's asura lebaila. Right? Again, the reason is the Messiah should have said mammon. The only reason why she's muteris lebaila is because we assume that the Ovid Kochavim didn't do anything to her because he doesn't want to do anything that could negatively impact his ability to collect. And Teda, you should know the Katani Sefer, because what does it say immediately after that in the Mishnah? Ayidei nefashis asur lebaila. That if it was ayidei nefashis, i.e., if there were other reasons for the kidnapping, well, then it should be asur lebaila. And we assume that there was bia. So Ki'ilu, there isn't just like a blanket kind of concept of like, well, if at the end of the day a woman is misyachi with an Ovid Kochavim, then they assume that there was no bia. No, that isn't the case. Specifically when it comes to a case of mominus where he wants to get his money back, he doesn't want to lose it. So okay, in that case she's materis lebaila. But we don't have a proof to say l'chatchila and b'di'evet over that, to make that distinction. V'sula media, and don't bring any more rayas from that Mishnah in Ksubis. It's not a good raya. Okay, fine. So what happened? So again, our Mishnah says when it comes to the animals, right? Don't leave your animal with an Ovid Kuchavim. But on the other hand, the Brisa says that you can purchase an animal from an Ovid Kuchavim to use as a korban. So Ravina says the distinction is our Mishnah is talking about Lechatchila, whereas the Brisa by the Korbanos is talking about B'diavad. He tried to bring a proof from Yichud, but that proof didn't work out. Now we are going to see the opinion of Rav Piras. Rav Piras Omer says Rav Piras, Lekasha ha Rav Eliezer Rabban. Oh, so Rav Piras gives a third answer, right? The first answer being what we had yesterday about Ovid Kuchavim Chas Al Beimta Sheli Teoker. That was yesterday's answer. We saw the opinion of Ravina Lechatchila B'diavad. Now we see the opinion of Rav Piras, who says the Machlokes Rav Eliezer and the Chachamim, as we're about to see. That Rabbi Eliezer says Chayshinon l'Revia, like our Mishnah, and the Chachamim say Einon Chayshinon l'Revia, like we see in the Brisa, which says that you could purchase an animal for a korban from them. Here we go. Rav Piras Omar says Rav Piras, Lekash, it's no problem. Rabbi Eliezer, our Mishnah that says that we're concerned about Revia, about marriage, is Rabbi Eliezer. Harabanan, whereas the Brisa, which says no problem, you could purchase an animal from Ovid Kuchavim and use it as a korban, that is the Rabbanan. It's not, as we learned in a Mishnah, Gabe Poras Chatos by a Poche Adume. Rabbi Eliezer says, Rabbi Eliezer, Eino nikachas min ha'ovid kuchavim. Rabbi Eliezer says a Parah Aduma may not be purchased from an Ovid Kuchavim. Chacham Matirim, whereas the Chachamim say a Parah Aduma may be purchased from the Ovdei Kuchavim. My lab, but the Machlokes is the Rabbi Eliezer says Chayshinon l'Revia. The Rabbi Eliezer says don't purchase the Parah Aduma from Ovdei Kuchavim because Chayshinon l'Revia. We're concerned that maybe the Ovdei Kuchavim married the Parah Aduma. Rabbanan say no problem. You could purchase the Parah Aduma from the Ovdei Kuchavim because lo Chayshinon l'Revia. We don't assume that the Ovdei Kuchavim married the Parah Aduma. But Mimai, so before we say Mimai, and because the reason why I want to stop here for a second is because this is essentially what the Machlokas is, right? This is Rav Pidas' opinion. We're going to ask some questions that maybe that's not the Machlokas, but we reject those things. So at the end of the day, this is the Machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chacham. Rabbi Eliezer says Choshishin l'Revia, right? That we're concerned that maybe the Ovdei Kuchavim married the Parah Aduma, and therefore our Mishnah would be the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer that, when it says that do not leave your animal with Oved Kuchavim because Chayshinon l'Revia, that's Rabbi Eliezer. And the Brisa, which says that you could purchase an animal from an Oved Kuchavim to use as a korban, that's the Rabbanan who say lo Chayshinon l'Revia. That is how Rabbi Pidas explains it. We can ask questions now. Maybe that's not the Machlokes in Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim about Chayshinon l'Revia. We're going to reject those. I just want to be clear that this is the actual distinction between Rabbi Eliezer and Chachamim, and that's how Rabbi Pidas wants to explain the distinction between our Mishnah and the Brisa. Okay. Now, Mimai, frag the Gemara, how do we know that that is in fact the Machlokes about Chayshinon l'Revia or not? Dilma. Maybe everybody agrees, like the Chachamim, that, or at least like we want to explain the Chachamim that lo Chayshinon l'Revia. Okay, then we're going to have to explain Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. What's wrong then with purchasing a Parah Aduma from Ovdei Kuchavim? This is why Rabbi Eliezer says you may not purchase a Parah Aduma from Ovdei Kuchavim. It's because Kitav Yehuda Amar Rab, for an entirely different reason. That says Rav Yehuda Amar Rab, Hiniach alein uda shel sakin posla, that the pasuk says asher lo Allah aleo ol. It says by Parah Aduma. Taka, it's this week's parsha for me, not for you, but for me. It's Taka this week's parsha Chukas. Asher lo Allah aleo ol, that you can't put upon it a yoke, and putting upon includes even if at any point in this Parah Aduma's life a bundle of sacks was put on the Parah Aduma, it is no longer usable because it was Allah aleha ol, right? Or Allah aleha, stuff was put on it. Because stuff was put on it, it is no longer usable. So the shaila is, do we have to be concerned that maybe stuff was put on it? Rabbi Eliezer says yes. If the paraduma belongs to an Ovid Kochavim, yes, we have to be concerned that maybe stuff was put on it, and therefore you can't buy it from them. Whereas the Chacham say we're not concerned that stuff was put on it. Okay, I'm reading again. If somebody placed upon the paraduma at any point in its life a bundle of sacks, pasla, it's psula, it can't be used as a paraduma. Uve egla, when it comes to egla arufa, right? It says by egla arufa, asher, what is it by egla arufa? Asher le moshcha ba'oil, that it was not pulled with a yoke. So by an egla arufa, it's not enough to just place something on it, you would then have to pull it. So by egla arufa, uve egla achetim shoich, you'd have to not just place something on it, but also give it a tug, pull it, in order to be unusable as an egla arufa. Mar sovai chashinon. So let's say the Rebbe Eliezer says we are concerned that maybe a bundle of sacks was at some point put on the animal by the Ovid Kochavim, on the paraduma by the Ovid Kochavim. Whereas the Chachamim say, meh, we're not concerned about it. Lo sagadaitich, no, that is not the explanation of the machlokes. How come? Because, an Ovid Kochavim who is raising a paraduma knows that they've got something special. They know that they've got something that the Jews will want, and that the Jews will be willing to pay a pretty penny for. And he is not going to ruin that opportunity to make a pretty penny by just, I'm tired, I'm going to put a bundle of sacks on this paraduma. No way. He wants to preserve this special animal that he can get a pretty penny for. So don't say that this is the machlokes about are we concerned that a bundle of sacks was put on it. No, of course, the Ovid Kochavim is not going to put a bundle of sacks on the para aduma. He wants to make that pretty penny. He knows that if he puts this sack on it, while it might be temporarily convenient, he's not going to risk the loss of the pretty penny. So Chanami, where am I? But then fragt the Gemara, okay, so what? You prefer to say that Rabbi Eliezer is concerned, concerned that maybe the Kochavim married the para aduma? But why don't you say the same thing there? That, can't he just hold himself back for a shtickle anoya of marrying his para aduma? He's going to now lose out on his pretty penny, right? So if you're going to reject the notion that the machlokes is about if he put a bundle of sacks on it, we say, no, of course he didn't, because he doesn't want to lose out on the pretty penny. So say the same thing here, right? That, of course, he didn't marry his para aduma. He doesn't want to lose out on the pretty penny. So also mitzvah tokfa. Yeah, but the difference is that when it comes to marrying the para aduma, you're dealing with yetzer haras there, right? If he has a taiva to marry his para aduma, it might be very difficult to hold that back. And therefore, because we're dealing with the Yetzers over there in Taivas, so therefore there actually is a concern that he married his paraduma according to Rabbi Eliezer. But now, wait, maybe both Rabbi Eliezer and the Chacham agree that we're not concerned that the Ovid Kochavim married the paraduma. And here is the reason why Rabbi Eliezer says not to buy the paraduma from the Ovid Kochavim. Because the Tani Shila, as Shila taught, the Tani Shila that Shila taught, my time of Eliezer, Akam Rabbi Eliezer says not to buy a paraduma from Ovid Kochavim, to have to buy from a Yid. Daber el b'nei Yisrael v'yikchu elecho. Speak to the Yidden v'yikchu, and as Rashi points out, Yikchu could also be read as yakichu, not to take, but to give. To give. And therefore, right, so Daber b'nei Yisrael v'yikchu, kilu Daber b'nei Yisrael v'yakichu. That Dafka, the Yidden have to be the ones to sell the paraduma to be the paraduma, not from a Ovid Kochavim, right? So again, you could say it's the Tani Shila. My time to Eliezer. Why does Eliezer say that you may not buy from a paraduma from Ovid Kochavim? Because Daber el b'nei Yisrael v'yikchu elecha b'nei Yisrael yakichu then Ovdei Kochavim Yakichu. That it must be the Yidden who are selling the Parah Aduma, not the Ovdei Kochavim. Lo sakadaitich. No, again, we reject that. That is not the reason for Rabbi Eliezer that he says, well, you have to dafka buy from it, meaning because the pasuk says to buy from a Yid. Because the Katani Seifa, that the Seifa of the Braise says, Kulon, was it a Braise or a Mishnah? I think it might take a bit of Mishnah. Mishnah. It says in the Seifa, and similarly, Rabbi Eliezer would have the same psul by all of the korbanos, not just the Parah Aduma. Now, if we're saying that it's because of the pasuk specifically by Parah Aduma, Dabro b'nei Yisrael v'yikchu elecha, etc., that's specific to the Parah Aduma. It wouldn't apply to the other korbanos. So, from the fact Rabbi Eliezer is saying is that just like it's also by the Parah Aduma, it's also by all korbanos. That must be talking about the concern of marriage of the animal. If you think that the reason for Rabbi Eliezer's opinion that you have to buy from a Yid is because of the concern because of Rab Shila, that it's a Gzeres HaKosov, but that Gzeres HaKosov is specifically by Parah Aduma. Shlama Parah Ksiv Bo Kicha. It says this by Parah Aduma, however, Elakulu Korbanos Kicha Ksivbu, but it doesn't say Kicha by the other Korbanos. And therefore, it would be specific to Parah Aduma, and Rabbi Eliezer says, but this psul applies to all korbanos, so therefore something that applies to all korbanos, it would make sense if it's a concern that maybe the owner, the Oved Kochavim owner, married the animal. So this is be'etzim where we leave things in terms of understanding Rabbi Eliezer. So where we are right now is Rabbi Eliezer says that the Parah Aduma must be purchased from a Yid, because by the Ovdei Kochavim Chashinon L'Revia, there's a concern that the Ovdei Kochavim married the Parah Aduma, and therefore in our Mishnah also, where we say don't leave your animal with the Ovdei Kochavim, that's Rabbi Eliezer, and the Chachamim say you can buy a Parah Aduma from an Ovdei Kochavim because we're not concerned about marriage, and therefore the Brisa that says that you can buy animals from Ovdei Kochavim for korbanos, it's like the Chachamim who says that we're not Chashinon L'Revia. Now, but now the Gemara suggests that maybe when the Chachamim disagree with Rabbi Eliezer by Parah Aduma and say that the Parah Aduma must be purchased from, the Chachamim say that Parah Aduma does not need to be purchased from Yid, that a Parah Aduma can be purchased from Ovdei Kochavim. But maybe the Chacham wouldn't say that generally, right? Meaning we wanted to say that the Brisa, which says that you could buy an animal from Ovdei Kochavim to be used as a korban, generally is like the Rabbanan. Maybe the Rabbanan wouldn't say that. Maybe the Rabbanan limit their opinion to Parah Aduma. Why? Because Parah Aduma is a very expensive item, as we talked about the pretty penny. It's worth a pretty penny. So because it's worth a pretty penny, that's where the rabbis say that you could trust that the Ovdei Kochavim didn't marry the animal. But maybe by just general korbanos, where you're just buying a regular sheep or whatever, maybe the Chacham would agree with Rabbi Eliezer that we do have to be concerned about marriage. Right? The Mer Yikarin, that is expensive. Parah Aduma is an expensive, pretty penny item. So there, maybe the Chacham say, maybe that's where the Chacham say, Chashinon, lo Chashinon L'Revia, and you could purchase it from them. Avo, the shor korbanos by regular korban, modu le. Maybe they would agree with Rabbi Eliezer that we have to be concerned about marriage by other korbanos. Money. But if you say that, well then the brisa that says that you can purchase an animal from Ovdei Kochavim to be used as a korban, then who's the author of that brisa then? It's not Rabbi Eliezer. So Rabbi Eliezer says we're concerned about marriage. And it's not the Chacham either, because the Chacham only say that there's no concern by Parah Aduma, but by regular korban, dude, there would be concern. Then who's the author of that brisa? Lo Rabbi Eliezer, v'lo Rabban, v'od, and more so, Tani Behedrid actually explicitly says in a brisa, "My osivu le chavroi le Rabbi Eliezer." What did the Chachamim reply to Rabbi Eliezer? Koltzon keder yikov tzulach yalo arotzon mizbechi. That all of the sheep of Yishmael, of the non-Yidden, yikov tzulach will be gathered to you yalo arotzon mizbechi, and they will be brought as a rotzen, a desire on my altar, meaning it sounds like the Chacham basically responded to Rabbi Eliezer and says that actually when it comes to korbanis, you can purchase animals from the Ovdei Kochavim. So we see that that the Chacham's opinion is not limited to Para Aduma, and rather this is a general machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim when it comes to korbanis. Rabbi Eliezer says we have to be concerned that the chashinin the revia, and or even in general, right? Rabbi Eliezer says chashinin the revia, whereas the Chachamim say that lo chashinon the revia, that we're not concerned about marriage. Okay, moving on. Now says the Gemara, Ad kan loy plige elo b'chashoshe. The machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim is about, are we concerned that maybe there was marriage? Rabbi Eliezer says, yes, we're concerned that maybe there was. The Chachamim are saying, while I agree that if there in fact was, it would be a problem, but so long as we don't know that there was a marriage, we don't assume that there was a marriage. But the underlying sentiment is that if we knew that the Oved Kochavim married the animal, it would be unusable as a para aduma. It would be unusable as a para aduma, right? So we have this para aduma that we're purchasing from the Oved Kochavim. We have no intel that this para aduma was married to its Oved Kochavim owner. If we did know that it was married, so then it would be unusable. The question is, we don't have any intel that it was married to its owner. And therefore, Rabbi Eliezer says, but we have to be concerned that maybe there was a marriage. The Chachamim say we don't have to be concerned that there was a marriage. But again, if we knew for sure that there was a marriage, then everyone agrees it would be a problem. Again, Ad kan lo plige, Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim argue, do we, when we lack any intel to indicate that there was a marriage, do we have to be concerned that maybe there was one? But if we know that the Oved Kochavim certainly married this para aduma, pasla, of course, it is going to be pasla. Shmamina de pare kodshim mizbeach hi. And that means, therefore, that the para aduma is treated as kodshim mizbeach, is treated as a kodshim that goes on the mizbeach, which is a different status than kodshe bedek habayis, kodshim that we are donating to the temple treasury, versus kodshim that is going to go on the mizbeach. And because it's kodshim that's going to go on the mizbeach, that is why revia would be a problem, right? Roveya and nirva, they are psulin for korbanos. The kodshe bedek habayis, because if it was merely kodshe bedek habayis mi mifsala, but would marriage ruin it if it was kodshe bedek habayis? No, it wouldn't. Revia is only an issue for kodshe mizbeach. The kodshe bedek habayis mi mifsala revia. But the Gemara answers, no, you could say that actually the para aduma is considered kodshe bedek habayis. Well, then why is revia an issue? Shiny pare v'chatos kaya rachmana, because by para aduma the pasuk actually says chatos hi. It is considered a korban chatos, and because even though it's bedek habayis, the Torah refers to it as a chatos, so therefore we treat it as we would a chatos, i.e., that revia would be a problem. So but if that's the case, that revia is a problem because it says chatos, and we're applying halachas of chatos here to the para aduma, well then yotzei doifen should be posel. I actually didn't look this up. I assume what it means is a C-section. Let me actually just confirm here. Yotzei doifen, removed from its mother's womb by way of the abdominal. Yeah, I think it's a C-section. So if we're saying that by pari adume revia is a problem because it's kodshe mizbeach, no, we're saying it could be kosher bedek habayis, but it says chatas. Therefore we say that revia would be a problem, just like by a korban chatas. But then yotzei doifen should also be a problem. A C-section should also be a problem for a paria adume. Right, where are we? Apostles, remember the paria kosher mizbeach, the kosher bedek habayis mifsila bar v'yeshani par de chatas kairach manel me'atot. It also be yotzei doifen. And if you can say, yeah, that's exactly correct. It's exactly correct. It says chatas he, therefore we treat paria aduma like we would a chatas, and yotzei doifen is possible. But that can't be, because alom etani we learn in a braise, hikdisha be yotzei doifen psula. That if you were makdish as a paria aduma a yotzei doifen, it's possible. Reb Shimon machshir. Reb Shimon says it's kosher. Now, if we're saying that because we treat it the same way that we treat a chatas, well then how could Reb Shimon say that it's kosher b'yotzei doifen? Chatas is possibly yotzei doifen. Mechitema, Reb Shimon the time of yotzei doifen vlad mayu, but we will say, wait, but what's that? Reb Shimon's opinion, right? Of course, as we know, as it's come up randomly, right, a few times throughout our learning, that when a boy is born, so then there's, for the mother, there's 7 days of Tumah, 33 days of Tyra, then there's a korban Yoledes. For a girl, it's 14 days, 66 days, and also a korban. But what if it's a yotzei doifen? What if it's a C-section? So we say, no, if it's a C-section, then no. Then right, it's not considered a vlad ma'aya. There would be no days of Tumah and Tyra and korbanis. But Reb Shimon's opinion is no, it's a vlad ma'aya. There would be yimei Tumah, yimei Tyra, korban yoledes. So v'chitem Reb Shimon the time, if you're going to say, well, Reb Shimon is consistent with his reasoning, that a yotzei doifen vlad ma'ayu, that a yotzei doifen is a regular vlad, and therefore the same thing would apply by the paria aduma. And even though it says chatos, still yotzei doifen is fine. But Reb Yochanan says, moidai Reb Shimon then in kodshim, that no, when it comes to kodshim, however, Reb Shimon would agree she'enu kadosh, that a yotzei doifen is not kadosh, and therefore if we're saying that, it says chatos by paria aduma, therefore we treat it like a chatos, well then yotzei doifen would be possible even according to Reb Shimon. He says, right, Reb Shimon says yotzei doifen is kosher by humans but not by a korban. So the shiny pore horlu mum posable dvar eva v'avodah posable. So answers the Gemara, actually here's the dilio. Forget about the chatos he thing. Forget about that. Rather, a paria aduma is bedek habayis, and therefore, okay, so if it's bedek habayis, right, kosher bedek habayis, so therefore, by default, revia is not an issue. Yotzei doifen is not an issue. However, by paria aduma, we know asher ein ba mum. It's not allowed to have a mum. A paria aduma is not allowed to have a mum. El shani paria horlu mum posaba. A mum is posel by a paria aduma. Dvar erva. And since a mum is posel by a paria aduma, well then also erva, revia, is also going to be posel by a paria aduma. Also avodah zarah, I guess if it was worshipped as a getchke, or if it is a getchke. So that, well, I guess that would be its worship as a getchke. So it would also be posel. The pasuk says kizmashchosam bam v'em mumbam. That the pasuk juxtaposes mumbam, having a mum, to mashchosam. And what's mashchosam? But then at the very bishmal, b'chomakom shneimar hashchose, enu ela dvar erva v'avodah zarah. Dvar erva, the siv ki hishchis, kol basar is dar kol arts. By the Dora Mabul, it says ki hishchis, kol basar dar kol. They were having a rayas. V'avodah zarah, the siv pen tashchisun, v'asisim lochem pesel. Maybe it will be tashchisun and make avodah zarah. So we have the juxtaposition of kimashchosam boem mumbam, and we know that. So let's go back for a second. Since by a paria aduma it says asher ein ba mum, there is a requirement to be mum free, and therefore whenever we're talking about mums, we're also talking about kimashchosam bam mumbam, right? So now we get into the hashchosa zone. Hashchosa is avodah zarah, is gilarayos, which is why by paria aduma there cannot be Revia, right? Revia is a problem by Paraduma because of the whole mum connection. But in terms of Yotze Dorfin, that would not be a problem. Okie dokie. That was Daf Chav Gimel. We're going to stop here. That was Daf Chav Gimel, Masechta Avodah Zarah. We continued on our quest to answer the question of, are we concerned about Ovdei Kochavim marrying animals or not? Our Mishnah says, don't leave your animals with the Ovdei Kochavim because we are concerned about marriage. But we have a brisa that says that you can buy animals from Ovdei Kochavim and use them as korbanis. So it sounds like we're not concerned about marriage. So Ravina had explained, well, Mishnah is the chatchila, the brisa by the korbanis is b'di'evin. Rav Pidas had explained that it's a machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and the Chacham. Rabbi Eliezer says choshishin l'revia, and our Mishnah is like Rabbi Eliezer, and the Chacham say ein choshishin l'revia, and that is the and the Chacham say ein choshishin l'revia, and therefore the brisa which says you could buy animals for korbanis from of the Chacham is like the Chacham. However, both Rabbi Eliezer and the Chacham agree that if we know for sure that the Ovdei Kochavim married the Paraduma, it would be possible, and we said that the reason for that is that even though Paraduma is considered kosher bedek habayis, where revia would not be a problem, but because mum is an issue for Paraduma, so whenever a mum is an issue, so Avodah Zarah and Gilui Arayos are also issues, and therefore a Ovdei Kochavim marrying a Paraduma would be an issue there. Peace out.